It's Wednesday, the 14th of March 2012, and in this Boardroom Talk special podcast, Roger Jardine, the Chief Executive of Aveng, joins us. Well, Roger, we've been having, I guess, mixed bag of results coming out of the construction groups, or infrastructure development group, as you like to call yourselves. Big problems at Murray and Roberts, also a difficult time at Group 5. Wilson Bailey were pretty good. And your numbers, revenues are up nicely, 13%, but your headline earnings down as well. Is this an acceptable result for you, given the base you're coming off?
Well, I think our result is mainly affected by problem contracts. You see that impact coming through. In Australia, we've had 2 problem contracts which have affected our margin there. Our margin in Australasia came in at 1.7%. That's outside of our range, our target range of 4 to 5%. So the extent to which we can fix those contracts will return to that underlying profitability.
So Australia is the issue that's
that's one issue
giving you some problem.
We've mentioned those contracts previously. We've mentioned 3 at the end of the year. 2 of them we're feeling more comfortable with. We've taken adequate provisions there. But if you look at the underlying business, our order book is up 62% there. Of our 46 billion order book, 31 billion is Australasia. So a very strong business, and we're fixing up some of these contracts.
Just explain the order book for people who are not that au fait with it.
The order book, we would look at a 2-year order book, which is contracts that we have secured and signed agreements to execute on.
So does that mean the turnover for the next 2 years?
Well,
minimum?
In the 46 billion 2-year order book, between 65 and 70% would be in the year ahead in terms of the execution, just to give you a sort of rule of thumb on how to look at the order book. The order book is generally a measure of the runway, the health of the company going forward. So our order book's up 24%. We have taken some strain in the domestic South African construction market, which is in line with the softness of the market here. We've also been quite careful not to price too aggressively in this market, because obviously when the market turns, you don't want to have used or utilized your capacity on suboptimal contracts. So our portfolio diversification is a strong point for the Aveng Group, where we're in 30 countries. And you're seeing while South Africa's weak, our order book is still strong at 46 billion rand.
That's true, but I guess it's only going to become apparent in time how smart those contracts were. When you said a soft market, in other words, in layman's terms, that means that it's not easy to get good prices from your perspective, or high margins. What process do you go through to make sure that you don't make a mistake and you don't end up like Murray and Roberts did on the Gautrain?
Look, I think in tough markets you find that clients tend to also want to pass on more risk to the contractor. We have a risk committee where we look very closely at the risk profile of a contract. And, it's quite scientific in terms of how one attacks risk and one's risk appetite. But there's some things that you cannot really plan for. And one of our problem contracts, for example, in Gladstone, Queensland, Australia, that project was delayed by unseasonal flooding. You'll recall it was in the popular press, etc. And once that happens, you fall behind, and then you have to make up on your productivities, and there's a cost involved. And then you get into all sorts of other issues. So I think in terms of our own risk profile, we look very carefully at our margin. The embedded margin in our 2-year order book is about 4 to 5%, which is our target range, really. And then the extent to which one can deliver on that, you don't have these unforeseen risks, and also problem contracts don't bedevil the situation.
And you can't insure against that, unforeseen risks?
I think that you can. I mean, some of it can be regarded as force majeure. In some cases, you can get into argy-bargy with the client as to exactly whose fault it is and who should take that risk. And that's sorted out in the fullness of time with the client. The nature of this business, especially when you're executing very complex, technical, massive infrastructure projects, things can unfold as not according to the game plan. And one has to put a lot of mitigating measures in place, which we invariably do.
Well, you've been around for a long time.
Yes.
It's an old group, and you've certainly learnt your lessons from the past as well, I have no doubt. Roger, just looking at the overall picture here in South Africa, as an infrastructure development group, the State of the Nation and the budget this year put a lot of focus on infrastructure development. So one would assume that your share price should have shot up after the President's speech. It didn't. It seems as though people are not quite believing what government is saying is going to translate into better business for people like Aveng.
I think there is a bit of that at play. The last 3 years and 3 budgets have talked of infrastructure spend. We've seen up to 35% of projects not coming to market or being delayed. And this recent State of the Nation address and budget again talked about infrastructure. I am personally encouraged because I think the rhetoric and the political will seems to be more pronounced. But there's a big difference between policy and implementation, and I think a strong partnership between government and the private sector is required, as we demonstrated as SA Inc. during the 2010 World Cup, where we delivered on time world-class infrastructure. South African construction and engineering firms are world-class, and we can deliver. And so I think the inflection point really is the moving to the implementation, the rollout. And to do that, yes, there's a political will. We will need a core of officials who can scope, adjudicate, award, and manage large contracts.
Are they there, though? We heard from the President that he's got the coordinating committee with himself, or the deputy presidents on it, all the related cabinet ministers, premiers of the provinces, and more. It sounds like the heads have been bashed together in the right places, but are you seeing any consequence?
I think there's a general feeling, and it's coming out of government itself in terms of capacity issues, especially as you go from national to provincial to local government, where we're seeing these project delays. And I think it just underscores the importance of a stronger relationship between government and the private sector.
One of those relationships that could help the country a great deal is your ability to put down railway tracks. We know that Transnet has got a huge budgets in the future, and I saw from these results that you've been doing a lot of work in that regard in Western Australia. Is it easy enough to bring it to South Africa?
Well, interestingly enough, this is a core competence that we're taking to Australia. Our Aveng Lennings Rail Services is a globally renowned brand. And we took a decision about 18 months ago to marry our domestic offering, which has a good global reputation, with McConnell Dowell, our Australian operation. So that 240 kilometers of railway track in Western Australia is an internal JV between Aveng Lennings and McConnell Dowell. We can compete. We're looking at entering markets in Mozambique. There's a lot of iron ore rail development in West Africa. So certainly we've started to talk about Aveng Rail going forward to position ourselves precisely for massive rail infrastructure development, and we can. We do rail tracks, we manufacture railway sleepers, and we do maintenance. We're doing the maintenance on the Gautrain at the moment.
Again, have you heard much from government in that regard, or if not directly government, but from Transnet on their plans?
Transnet is a big and valued client of ours. I think they are looking at their own rollout, and certainly when that happens, we'll be there to compete.
But no tenders yet?
Those are coming to market still.
That's one thing that investors in construction companies are a little skittish of at the moment is what happened at Murray & Roberts with a 2 billion rand rights issue. There's no announcement in this set of results of a rights issue. In fact, you seem to be in completely the opposite position with nearly 5 billion rand in cash.
Yes, we have close to 5 billion rand in cash. The way we've managed our company over the past few years now is to really focus on our diversification. We've just, in fact, signed a letter of intent with Codelco in Chile to develop a 1,000-meter deep shaft there. We're one of 4 companies globally that can do that. We have a strong balance sheet and our cash position. So with our overall financial health, there's no plans to to do that.
You've mentioned Chile, you've mentioned Australia, you've mentioned Mozambique, and it's no surprise then that 3/4 of your order book is outside of South Africa. Are you going to change that, rebalance that at some point?
Yeah, that's evolved over the last few years. You know, we're a global company. We're in 30 countries, so we're global, and we employ people around the world, 30,000 people. But we're also proudly South African, and we just talked about our balance sheet. And, being proudly South African, we'd like to apply our balance sheet at home. We are applying it in PPPs, for example, outside of South Africa. We're doing a light rail metro off the Gold Coast in Australia. And the mix isn't by design. We have a very simple philosophy. We fish where the fish are. So to the extent that the mix of our revenue geographically has shifted, it's really a reflection of where the activities are and us going after them there. And obviously, when South Africa becomes vibrant, we'll be here right at home. We'd like to be very strong in our home market.
Talking about another competitor, Group 5 took a terrible bath in its construction materials business that it bought. Are you having a similar experience?
You know, a year ago, our manufacturing and processing division, which is really where our steel processing and manufacturing sits, rebar is there. We make infrastructure products like roof tiles, paving. A year ago, and especially as the downturn post-2008 set in, we were taking a lot of strain there. And you'll also recall we had to pay a big fine last year, so we actually made a 24 million rand loss. In these numbers, the margin for that cluster is up to 6.2%. We had to rationalize factories. There was some impact on workers. We were fortunately able to redeploy many of them. And those interventions have paid off. So if you look across the Aveng portfolio, yes, we have some execution problems. On the steel side, we've done all the right things. That's operationally sound. Our manufacturing business is also in good health. Our open cast mining business is in good health. Our order book is quite strong. So in terms of runway, we have to focus more internally. And when the market domestically especially shifts, we'll ride that wave.
It sounds like you're well set for the time ahead, for the period in coming.
We are. My philosophy, Alec, has been we can't control the demand for steel in China, but we can run our businesses a lot better. And that's where our focus has been in the recent past.
Are you comfortable that you've got there now, and a score of 0 to 10, that your businesses from when you took over and the restructuring that you've had to do, or the work that you've had to do subsequent to that?
I think we've made a lot of progress. We can always do better, but definitely we're well positioned for growth, both internationally, as we've shown, and domestically when the market turns here.
Roger Jardine is the Chief Executive of Aveng.